It was 6:22 a.m. when the sun began to peek over the horizon at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. The terminal buzzed with the typical morning hustle and bustle. Rolling suitcases clattered along the tiled floor. Weary travelers clutched oversized cups of coffee, and children trailed behind their parents, dragging their feet as if they had just woken up. In the midst of this chaotic scene stood Marcus Thompson, a tall, well-groomed man in his early 40s with deep brown skin and a neatly trimmed beard. He exuded a calm confidence, moving with an air of purpose that suggested he was always several steps ahead, yet never felt the need to rush. Marcus adjusted the strap on his duffel bag and approached the gate agent, handing over his boarding pass without uttering a word. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson." The agent greeted him with a polite smile as she scanned the barcode. "You're all set. Have a pleasant flight." Marcus nodded in acknowledgement, a gesture that was neither cold nor overly friendly, just efficient. He walked toward the jet bridge, taking in the surroundings with keen observation. 3 teenagers were snapping selfies by the window, capturing memories of their trip. Nearby, an older couple engaged in a soft argument about whether or not they had remembered to lock their front door. Further back, a woman in a bright floral blouse was whispering intently into her phone. Marcus took note of it all, not out of paranoia, but from years of training. This was his off-duty time. He had just completed a federal surveillance operation in Tempe less than 18 hours ago. No headlines, no dramatic moments, just weeks of meticulous work involving wiretaps and stakeouts. As he stepped onto the plane, he quickly scanned the overhead bins, locating his seat in row 14, a window seat with ample space for his briefcase. He settled in comfortably, finally donning his noise-canceling headphones and allowing the soothing hum of the engines to wash over him. Just as he was starting to relax, a voice interrupted his peace. A middle-aged white woman with bleached blonde highlights and an overpowering scent of perfume stood hesitantly in the aisle. "Excuse me, I believe you're in my seat," she stammered, eyeing him with uncertainty. Marcus looked up, momentarily confused, then checked his boarding pass. "No, ma'am," he replied calmly, showing her the ticket. "I'm in 14A, the window seat." "Oh," she muttered, her expression shifting as she glanced down at her own boarding pass. "I'm in 14B. With a slight nod, Marcus gestured toward the middle seat, and she forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she settled in beside him. He turned his gaze to the window, adjusting his seatbelt as he sensed a subtle change in the atmosphere. Though they hadn't even pushed back from the gate, something felt off. The woman next to him was stiff and tense, clutching her designer tote as if it contained something fragile. Her furtive glances toward him did not go unnoticed. He brushed it off, having dealt with far worse situations in his line of work. As the safety demonstration commenced, Marcus noticed the woman's hand trembling slightly as she fastened her seatbelt. She kept casting nervous looks toward the back of the plane and then forward toward the cockpit. It crossed his mind that she might simply be a nervous flyer. But then, she did something unexpected. She reached for the call button. "Excuse me," she whispered to a flight attendant who leaned in. "I don't want to be a bother, but could I possibly be reseated?" The attendant blinked, taken aback. "Is something wrong with your seat, ma'am?" The woman leaned closer, her voice low but urgent. "I'm not saying anything's wrong. I don't feel safe sitting here. This man," she gestured slightly toward Marcus. "He's been acting strangely." Marcus remained silent, staring out the window, but inside, his stomach twisted with unease. The flight attendant appeared surprised. "He hasn't done anything though, right?" No, the woman insisted quickly. "But something just feels off. I'm a mother. I trust my instincts." The attendant shifted her weight, uncertain of how to proceed. "Let me check with my supervisor," she said, her voice cautious. The woman nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. Marcus turned his head to look at her directly, his voice steady. "You should be careful about what you imply, ma'am." She jumped slightly, clearly taken aback. "I didn't mean anything. I just want to be comfortable on my flight." He didn't respond, maintaining his composure as the attendant returned with a flight service manager, a woman in her late 30s with curly brown hair tied back in a bun. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted, and passengers were beginning to take notice. "Good morning," the manager said with professional calm. "I understand there's been a concern." The woman perked up, eager to voice her complaint. "Yes, I just don't feel comfortable sitting here. I thought maybe you might have another option available, for safety reasons." The manager's eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation. "Is there something wrong with your seat?" "No," the woman admitted, lowering her voice. "It's not that. It's the passenger next to me. I think he might be hiding something." The manager turned her gaze toward Marcus, who remained calm, his expression unreadable. The tension in the air thickened as nearby passengers shifted in their seats, some leaning in to hear better. With a heavy heart, Marcus realized that he was now the center of attention, caught in a web of misunderstanding and fear that had spiraled out of control. As the flight attendant raised her eyebrows, she looked between the woman and Marcus, trying to gauge the situation. The woman in 14B was visibly agitated, her hands gripping her tote bag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Marcus remained still, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the tension brewing in the cabin. "Sir, would you mind verifying your boarding pass?" the flight service manager asked, her tone professional but firm. Marcus nodded, reaching into his pocket and producing his boarding pass. He handed it over, his eyes meeting hers with a steady gaze. "Of course," he replied simply. The flight service manager scanned the pass, confirming his seat assignment. "14A. No issues here," she said, returning the pass to him. Yet the woman beside him wasn't satisfied. Her anxiety had transformed into a sense of urgency, and she leaned closer to the attendant, lowering her voice to almost a whisper. "I'm not saying he's done anything wrong, but I just don't feel safe. He hasn't said a word since I sat down, and he's acting aloof. That briefcase under his seat, it's suspicious." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The briefcase contained important documents from his job, but he had no intention of sharing that information with her. He had done nothing wrong. Yet here he was, being scrutinized based solely on his appearance and her gut feelings. "Ma'am, I need you to provide a specific reason for us to consider reseating you," the flight service manager said, her patience beginning to wear thin. "Has this passenger threatened you in any way?" The woman looked around, noticing that other passengers were now paying attention. A man in 13C turned around, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Lady, you asked the man to move his briefcase. Now, you're accusing him of what exactly?" he challenged. "I'm not accusing anyone," she shot back, her voice rising slightly. "I just want to feel safe." "You can't tell me that's too much to ask." "Safety is important," Marcus interjected, his voice calm yet firm. "But you're assuming danger based on an unfounded fear. I haven't threatened anyone, and it's not a crime to be quiet." The flight service manager nodded, trying to maintain control over the escalating situation. "I understand your concerns, but we need something more concrete to act on," she said to the woman, who was now visibly flustered. "I'd like to speak to the captain," the woman insisted, crossing her arms defiantly. "If something happens midair, and I didn't say anything, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself." Marcus shifted slightly in his seat, his patience wearing thin. "Is there a supervisor or air marshal on board? Because this situation is escalating over nothing," he said, his tone measured yet pointed. The flight service manager sighed, torn between the two parties. "I'll call ground control," she finally said. "The captain will be informed. For now, let's remain calm and see how we can resolve this." As she walked toward the front of the plane, Marcus could sense the eyes of the other passengers on him, some curious, others judgmental. A young woman in row 15 leaned in to whisper to her friend, her expression a mix of concern and intrigue. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted palpably. What had started as a routine flight was now filled with tension and apprehension. Moments later, the flight service manager returned, followed by a supervisor with a broad build and a clipboard in hand. His presence commanded authority, and the passengers fell silent as he approached. "Who made the report?" he asked flatly, scanning the row with a piercing gaze. "I did," the woman said, raising her hand too quickly, her voice filled with urgency. "I just wanted to ensure my safety. I didn't mean to escalate things, but I genuinely don't feel safe." Marcus could see the discomfort etched on the faces of the surrounding passengers, many of whom had been listening intently. Their eyes flicked back and forth between him and the woman, and he could almost hear the unspoken questions running through their minds. "Sir," the supervisor said, turning to Marcus, "we'd like to ask you to step off the plane for a moment so we can have a brief conversation with you." "Am I being removed from the flight?" Marcus asked, keeping his tone steady and composed. "No, it's just a precaution," the supervisor replied, trying to reassure him. "We want to ensure everything is in order." "Why?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but firm. "What's the reason for this?" "We've received a report of suspicious behavior," the supervisor stated, his expression revealing nothing. Marcus took a deep breath, realizing the absurdity of the situation. "I'm a federal agent returning from an assignment. I boarded quietly, and I've done nothing to warrant this treatment. Before you proceed, it would be wise to verify my credentials." The supervisor hesitated, clearly taken aback by Marcus's composed response. The woman beside him paled, the realization of her actions dawning on her as she glanced around at the watching passengers. A few whispers began to circulate, and Marcus could sense the shift in the room as more people began to comprehend the gravity of the misunderstanding. "Do you have any identification?" the supervisor asked, his tone more cautious now. With a calm motion, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and produced a black leather ID case. He opened it to reveal his badge, showcasing his position as a senior special agent with the FBI. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted dramatically, the tension giving way to disbelief and surprise. The passengers, who had been divided in their opinions just moments before, now shared a collective moment of realization. The woman in 14B, who had instigated the entire situation, sat frozen, her face a mask of shock and regret. "I am in the middle of returning home from a classified mission," Marcus continued, his voice steady. "I did not come here looking for trouble. I simply want to go home." The supervisor glanced at the badge, then back at Marcus, his expression shifting from authority to acknowledgement. "Let's confirm your credentials and clear this up," he said, now addressing the situation with a newfound seriousness. As the supervisor moved to call for confirmation, Marcus sat back in his seat, feeling the weight of the moment. The realization of how quickly fear could escalate into a public ordeal weighed heavily on him, and he couldn't help but think about the assumptions made based on nothing more than appearances. The atmosphere in the cabin was thick with tension as passengers exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Marcus sat motionless, his heart racing, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. The flight supervisor, visibly shaken by the situation, stepped away to contact ground control, leaving the woman beside him in a state of stunned silence. As she sat there, her earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a palpable unease. Marcus could see her fingers trembling as she toyed with her designer tote bag, her eyes darting nervously between him and the other passengers. It was a stark contrast to the confident demeanor she had displayed just moments before. "Agent Thompson," the supervisor called out as he returned to the aisle, flanked by a local police officer. The officer wore a standard-issue uniform, and the serious expression on his face indicated that he was prepared for any possible escalation. The supervisor's clipboard was clutched tightly in his hand, and he appeared to be weighing his next words carefully. "Sir, we need to ask you to step off the plane to answer a few questions," the supervisor stated, his tone firm yet cautious. Marcus took a deep breath, aware that the eyes of the entire cabin were on him. "Am I being removed from the flight?" he questioned, his voice steady, betraying none of the frustration he felt inside. "Not at all," the supervisor replied, though the way he glanced at the officer suggested otherwise. "We're just following protocol due to a report of suspicious behavior." "I see," Marcus said, his brow furrowing slightly. "And what exactly is considered suspicious? Sitting quietly and minding my own business?" The flight attendant from earlier, who had been observing from a distance, stepped closer, her expression a mix of concern and professionalism. "Sir, we just want to ensure everyone's safety. If you could please cooperate, we can resolve this quickly." Marcus nodded, his mind racing, trying to process how a simple flight had devolved into this chaotic scene. He stood up slowly, making sure to keep his movements calm and deliberate. As he made his way down the aisle, he could feel the weight of the passengers' stares, some sympathetic, others filled with judgment.
Please understand," Marcus said as he walked past the woman who had instigated the situation.
He kept his voice low, but the intensity of his words was unmistakable. "This is not just about me. This is about how easily fear can distort reality." The woman looked down, avoiding his gaze, and he could see the embarrassment wash over her face. The flight attendants exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to react to the unfolding events. Once he had stepped off the plane, the supervisor gestured for Marcus to follow him and the officer to a less crowded area near the boarding gate. They walked a few paces away from the open door of the aircraft, where passengers continued to board. The officer's presence felt heavier now, the reality of the situation settling in. "Agent Thompson, I need to ask you a few questions about what just happened," the supervisor said, his tone more conciliatory now that they were out of the spotlight. Of course," Marcus replied, his demeanor steady. But first, I would like to clarify something. I am not a threat. I am simply a federal agent returning home after a long assignment. The fact that I was reported as suspicious is troubling." The officer nodded, finally understanding the gravity of the misunderstanding. "I get that, sir. But can you explain why you didn't speak to the woman? It might have eased her concerns." Marcus sighed, knowing the answer was complicated. "I had just come from a high-stress job. I was trying to relax and didn't feel the need to engage in conversation. But I realize now that silence can be misinterpreted, especially in today's climate." The supervisor jotted down notes, looking thoughtful. "I appreciate your understanding. We just want to ensure that everyone is safe and feels safe on this flight." As they spoke, a small crowd had started to gather nearby, some passengers craning their necks to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Whispers floated through the air, and Marcus could feel the tension building again. "Let's be clear," Marcus said, raising his voice slightly to ensure that the onlookers could hear him. "What just happened was about more than just my presence. It was about assumptions based on my appearance. This incident reflects a larger issue in our society, one that causes harm and perpetuates fear." Several passengers nodded in agreement, their expressions shifting from curiosity to understanding. A young woman in a hoodie, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. "Yeah, it's ridiculous how quickly people jump to conclusions. I can't believe this is happening." "Exactly," Marcus said, grateful for her support. "We need to challenge these biases. I may be quiet, but that doesn't mean I'm dangerous." The officer glanced around at the crowd, sensing the growing solidarity. "We're just trying to do our job," he said, attempting to diffuse the situation. "But I think we can all agree that assumptions can lead to unnecessary confrontations." The crowd began to disperse slightly, but the tension remained. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and frustration. He had managed to assert his position, but the incident had left a mark on him. He wasn't just an agent. He was a black man navigating a world where his presence could trigger fear in others. As the supervisor continued to ask Marcus questions, the woman who had caused the disturbance remained silent, her shame evident. It was a moment of reckoning for her, one that she would likely carry long after this flight had ended. "Let's resolve this quickly," Marcus said firmly, wanting to return to the cabin and finish the flight home. But let's also take this as an opportunity to reflect on how we perceive one another. It's time to challenge our assumptions and strive for understanding. With that, the supervisor nodded, recognizing the truth in Marcus's words. As they prepared to return to the plane, Marcus hoped that perhaps, just perhaps, this experience would spark a change in how they all viewed one another, not just on this flight, but in their lives beyond it. As Marcus stood outside the plane, the weight of the situation hung heavy in the air.
The flight supervisor just finished taking down his information and was about to radio for confirmation of his credentials. The officer, still processing the unfolding drama, maintained his professional demeanor, but there was an underlying tension in his posture. "Agent Thompson," the supervisor said, his voice steady but laced with a hint of urgency. "I'm going to confirm your identification with TSA. Just a moment."
Marcus nodded, feeling a mix of anxiety and frustration. He knew that the process could take longer than expected, and he just wanted to get back to his seat. The passengers aboard were likely still on edge, and the longer this took, the more uncomfortable it would become for everyone involved. As the supervisor stepped away to make the call, Marcus took a deep breath. He glanced back toward the plane, where he could see a few passengers peering out from their seats, their eyes filled with curiosity and concern. Among them was the woman who had initiated this entire ordeal. She sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring blankly ahead, clearly grappling with the reality of what had just transpired. A few moments later, the officer returned, his expression shifting slightly as he processed the situation. "Agent Thompson, I've just been informed that your credentials are confirmed," he said, his tone now more respectful. "We appreciate your patience and cooperation." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew that the damage had already been done. "Thank you," he replied, trying to maintain his composure. "But I think it's important to address what just happened here." The supervisor nodded, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. "Absolutely. Let's head back to the cabin. I want to ensure that everyone feels safe and comfortable." As they walked back towards the plane, Marcus could feel the eyes of the passengers on him once again. He took a deep breath, preparing himself to confront the situation head-on. Once they reached the entrance, the supervisor gestured for him to step back on board first. "Thank you for your understanding, everyone," the supervisor began, addressing the passengers who had been silently witnessing the events unfold. "We appreciate your patience during this unexpected situation. We're committed to ensuring the safety and comfort of all our passengers." As Marcus stepped back into the cabin, he felt the tension shift. Some passengers offered him sympathetic smiles, while others looked away, their expressions still reflecting uncertainty. He made his way back to his seat in row 14, where the woman, Rhonda, sat in silence, her expression a mixture of shame and regret. "Can we talk?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. While he was still processing the events, he recognized that this could be an opportunity for dialogue. "Sure," he replied, his tone neutral. "But let's make this quick. We're about to take off." Rhonda took a deep breath, her eyes searching his for understanding. "I'm so sorry for what I did," she started, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to escalate things. I was just scared." "I understand fear," Marcus said, his tone steady. "But fear shouldn't justify harmful assumptions about someone based on their appearance." She nodded, her expression earnest. "I know, and I see that now. I didn't think about how my actions would affect you. I just felt uncomfortable. It wasn't fair to you. Fear can cloud judgment," Marcus replied, keeping his voice calm. "But we must recognize when that fear is based on stereotypes rather than facts. I didn't do anything to warrant your suspicion." Rhonda looked down, clearly affected by his words. "I realize that now. I didn't mean to profile you or make you feel unsafe. I just reacted without thinking." Marcus appreciated her honesty, but he felt compelled to emphasize the larger issue. "This isn't just about you and me. It's about the assumptions we make every day based on appearances. It's a systemic problem that many people face, and it needs to change." Rhonda nodded slowly, her eyes filled with realization. "I never thought about it that way. I've always considered myself open-minded, but I let my fears dictate my actions. I need to do better." As they continued to talk, the flight attendants resumed their safety demonstration, and the plane began to taxi down the runway. Marcus felt a sense of urgency to make this moment count. "If you genuinely want to change, start by having these conversations with others," he encouraged her. "Challenge those around you to confront their biases, just as you've begun to do. It's how we create real change." Rhonda's eyes lit up with determination. "You're right. I should talk to my friends and family about this. I want to ensure this doesn't happen again, not just for me, but for others." Marcus smiled faintly, appreciating her resolve. "That's a good start. Growth comes from acknowledging our mistakes and striving for understanding." As the plane lifted off, the tension that had filled the cabin began to dissipate. Passengers settled back into their seats, and the hum of the engines provided a comforting backdrop. Marcus looked out the window, reflecting on the events of the day. He knew this moment wouldn't erase the discomfort he had experienced, but perhaps it could serve as a catalyst for change. "Thank you for listening," Rhonda said, breaking his thoughts. "I really appreciate your willingness to talk to me." Marcus nodded. "Thank you for acknowledging your part in this. It takes courage to confront our biases." As the flight continued, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, and Marcus found himself engaging more comfortably with Rhonda. They shared stories and laughter, a stark contrast to the tension that had defined their earlier interactions. By the time they reached cruising altitude, Marcus felt a sense of hope. The journey had transformed from one of conflict into an opportunity for understanding. It was a reminder that while fear and assumptions could lead to misunderstandings, open dialogue and reflection could pave the way for change. As the plane soared through the clouds, Marcus realized that this experience could ripple out beyond the flight.
Perhaps Rhonda would carry this lesson with her, and in doing so, help create a more understanding world, one conversation at a time. As the flight continued its journey through the skies, Marcus felt a profound sense of introspection. The earlier tension had begun to fade, replaced by a cautious camaraderie between him and Rhonda. They had shared stories, exchanged laughter, and slowly dismantled the walls that had once divided them. The plane glided smoothly through the clouds, and for Marcus, the atmosphere transformed from one of anxiety to a hopeful exchange of ideas.
Once they reached cruising altitude, Marcus leaned back in his seat, feeling a mix of relief and contemplation. "You know," he began, turning to Rhonda, "this might seem strange, but I'm grateful for what happened today." Rhonda looked at him, a hint of surprise in her eyes. "Grateful? After everything that unfolded?" "Absolutely," he replied. "It's not every day that we get a chance to confront our biases and assumptions head-on. Today was a difficult experience, but it also opened up a dialogue that needed to happen." Rhonda nodded thoughtfully, her expression turning serious. "I've never had to face something like this before. I've always thought of myself as someone who respects others, but I let my fears get the best of me. I was quick to judge without knowing anything about you." "That's a common issue," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We all have biases we may not even realize we hold. The important part is recognizing them and actively working to change our mindset. It's about understanding that our perceptions can be influenced by societal narratives rather than facts." Rhonda leaned in, genuinely engaged.
You're right. I've seen discussions about racial bias and profiling on social media, but I never thought I'd be a part of something like this. It feels different when you're confronted with it directly. Exactly, Marcus replied. It's easy to dismiss these issues when they're just headlines or stories. But when you experience it firsthand, it forces you to reevaluate your beliefs and actions. As the flight attendants served refreshments, the atmosphere in the cabin felt lighter. Passengers exchanged smiles and small talk, the earlier discomfort dissipating like the clouds outside.
Marcus glanced around, noticing a few passengers still stealing glances at him and Rhonda, perhaps still processing the scene from earlier. "Do you think people will remember what happened?" Rhonda asked, her curiosity piqued. "I hope so," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "But I also hope they remember the conversation that followed. It's not just about the incident itself. It's about the lessons we take away from it. If even one person feels inspired to examine their own biases, then that's a step towards change." Rhonda smiled, her demeanor shifting as she considered his words. "I want to be that person. I want to have those conversations with my family and friends. I want them to understand the impact of their actions." "That's the spirit," Marcus encouraged, feeling a sense of pride in her determination. "Change starts at home, and it can ripple outwards. You have the power to influence those around you, to challenge their assumptions, and encourage them to think critically." As they continued to talk, the conversation flowed seamlessly, touching on various topics, from personal interests to societal issues. Marcus found himself sharing stories about his career in law enforcement, the challenges he faced, and the rewards that came from helping others. Rhonda listened intently, her earlier apprehension replaced by genuine curiosity. "Is it hard to do what you do?" she asked, her voice softening. "I can't imagine the pressure you must feel." "It can be challenging," Marcus admitted, "but it's also incredibly rewarding. Every day presents an opportunity to make a difference, to protect and serve. It's a reminder that while there's darkness in the world, there's also light."
And sometimes, we have to be that light for ourselves and others. Rhonda nodded, her expression contemplative. "I've always admired people in your line of work. It takes courage to face challenges head-on, especially in a world where fear often dictates our actions. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but rather the ability to confront it," Marcus replied. "We all have our battles to face, whether they're external or internal. The key is to keep pushing forward and to support one another along the way."
As they continued their discussion, the flight attendants announced that they were preparing for landing. The cabin began to buzz with excitement as passengers gathered their belongings and fastened their seatbelts. Marcus felt a sense of anticipation building within him, knowing that they were nearing their destination, both physically and in terms of their personal growth. "Thank you for this conversation," Rhonda said as the plane began its descent. "I didn't expect to learn so much today." "Thank you for being open to it," Marcus replied with a smile.
It takes courage to confront uncomfortable truths, and you've shown that today. As the plane touched down in St. Louis, the passengers erupted in applause.
A collective sense of relief and gratitude filling the air. Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment as he unbuckled his seatbelt, ready to disembark. He had faced an unexpected challenge, but it had led to a meaningful connection and an opportunity for growth. As they exited the aircraft, Rhonda turned to him one last time. "I'll make sure to carry this lesson with me."
"I promise to do better." Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with hope. "That's all we can ask for, growth and understanding. It's a journey, but every step counts." As they parted ways in the terminal, Marcus glanced back at Rhonda, who now wore a look of determination. He felt a renewed sense of purpose as he headed toward the rideshare area. The challenges he faced as a federal agent were often daunting, but moments like these reminded him of the impact he could have. In a world filled with assumptions and biases, Marcus knew that conversations like the one he had shared with Rhonda were crucial. They had the power to break down barriers and foster understanding. As he stepped into the rideshare vehicle, he felt a sense of optimism for the future, a future where empathy and dialogue could pave the way for change, one conversation at a time.